Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the July 2016 Farm to Early Care and Education group webinar. We'll give it about one more minute for folks to continue to join us. It looks like we still have a number of people signing on. As you're signing on, you'll notice that all attendees are in listen-only mode. So as we move forward, when you do have questions, please feel free to enter your questions into the question box in your control panel. Also, just an FYI, this webinar will be recorded and will be available following in the next few days. I'll send out an email link for all of you, and it'll also be available in our resource database. So we'll give it about one more minute as folks continue to sign on. Again, as you're joining, you'll notice that all attendees are in listen-only mode. So as you have questions, please feel free to enter those into the question box, and we can have those available for our presenters. The webinar will also be recorded, so we'll send out that link following the webinar, and it will be available in our resource database as well. So we are at about 2 after the half hour, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Many thanks again for joining us today for our July Farm to Early Care and Education group webinar. My name is Lacey Stevens, and I'm the Farm to Early Care and Education Associate with the National Farm to School Network, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. So welcome and thank you again for joining us. Today we'll be focusing in on celebrating cultural diversity with Farm to Early Care and Education. We have a fantastic panel of speakers and presenters to share their experiences, and we hope that it'll be a valuable experience with lots of resources and information for you. So looking at the agenda for today, we do have some updates from the National Farm to School Network about some new resources and information relevant to farm to early care and education. Then we'll jump into the content of our presentation today, featuring Helen Dumbalis, our Director of Programs at the National Farm to School Network, and she'll share with us some opportunities that National Farm to School Network has taken and approaches that National Farm to School Network has taken in promoting and prioritizing culturally relevant work in both our policy and programmatic approaches. Then we have three fantastic presentations from programs across the country. We'll hear from Afia Bediako, Rebecca Limos, as well as Angela Prokop and Peku Hang about their work in integrating cultural relevancy into their farm to early care and education programs. So we'll start with just some very brief announcements about some upcoming resources and events to be aware of from the National Farm to School Network. First of all, tomorrow we will be releasing our full report highlighting data from the 2015 Survey of Early Care and Education Settings. So many of you are probably well aware and have seen the infographic and fact sheet that we released several months ago. And this full report provides even more detail and insight into that survey data. And along with that, on Thursday, we'll be releasing a blog that provides ideas and guidance on using these tools to expand farm to early care and education across the country, and provide some speaking points for different stakeholders to help you do that. So look for these items coming out tomorrow in the National Farm to School Network member newsletter, and they'll also be released through the Farm to ECE listserv. So another exciting resource for you to utilize in your work. I'd also like to mention our Farm to School month coming up in October, which seems far away, but really is just around the corner. And this is really a great time to start planning and thinking about those Farm to School month activities. So this month's theme is One Small Step. And one of the first things that you can do is sign up to be an outreach partner. So visit farmtoschool.org. In our Farm to School Month tab, you can find an opportunity to be an outreach partner. And that'll give you access to weekly toolkits to help you promote and share Farm to School Month events and activities, and also help you highlight your organization on our National Farm to School Network website. So take advantage of that opportunity, and October will be here before you know it. So start thinking about those great Farm to School Month activities. So jumping right into our content today. So as I mentioned, our focus today on the webinar is integrating culturally relevant materials, approaches, and activities into farm to early care and education. So some of our objectives today include helping all of us recognize the importance of embracing and lifting up diversity in the early care and education setting. Recognizing how farm to early care and education can be a powerful opportunity to empower children and their families by acting as that leverage point to celebrate cultural tradition, knowledge, and heritage. And then from our presenters, we'll help to understand the process of developing and implementing culturally appropriate and relevant materials for farm to early care and education initiatives. So, to help us all get on the same page and ensure we're having a shared vocabulary in the conversation, I'd like to talk briefly about what we're talking about when we talk about cultural relevancy. So, cultural relevancy is really empowering students and their families intellectually, socially, emotionally, and politically by using cultural reference to impart knowledge, skills, and attitudes. So, utilizing a teaching approach that utilizes the backgrounds, knowledge, and experiences of students and families to inform lessons and methodologies, and really help shape our curricula, our materials, and activities around those cultural reference and backgrounds to help reach and empower students, their families, as well as providers. So, a few elements to keep into consideration as we're considering cultural relevancy in our materials and our curricula and our approach. So, cultural considerations may include how we define ourselves as members of a group, our sense of place where we live, ethnicity, where our ancestors were from, how we live, and what we believe. So, really broad categories of how we can see and identify culture or how culture shapes our views. So, with those kind of definitions and considerations in mind, I would like to turn it over to Helen Dumbalis, our Director of Programs at the National Farm to School Network, to give us some insight into how the National Farm to School Network integrates cultural relevancy into our broader programmatic and policy work. So, Helen, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Lacey, and hello, everyone. We're very happy to have you on today's webinar for this incredibly important topic. So, as Lacey said, I'm going to give a brief overview of the National Farm to Schools Network's work with respect to cultural relevancy and really even beyond that, looking at equity in our work. So I'm going to start by sharing with you some of our core values. We have a list of core values for our organization and wanted to in particular flag and share with you two of those. As you can see there on the slide, the first states that local food should be available in all schools to nourish every child, regardless of race and ethnicity, economic standing, or geographic location. So with that one, you can see that we advocate for equity in our work, and that one's specific to the local procurement core element of farm to school, but this certainly applies to the other two core elements as well, school gardens and education, where we want to ensure that all children in all settings have access to farm to school activities. And along with that equity piece of NFSN's work, I want to point out our core value that's listed there on the goal to strengthen the farm to school movement while keeping intact the unique flavor and diversity of individual farm to school program sites across the country. So with this one, I want to point out that we do see it as part of our core values of the work that we do to advocate for cultural relevancy and diversity in farm to school programming across the country. The way that we look at farm to school, we don't prescribe a one size fits all model. We know that the farm to school movement is a grassroots movement. It was created based on parents and farmers and community members that wanted to establish farm to school activities in their communities. And so as a national organization, we recognize that those uniquenesses in communities are what makes farm to school so important and so successful. And so we recognize that there are those three core elements of procurement, education, and gardens, but that every program is going to be different and unique based on the needs of a community. So with that, Lacey, if you want to take us to our next slide, now that I've shared with you our overall core values around equity and cultural relevancy, I want to just point out some examples of what this actually looks like in practice. So first, as you can see there, in 2014 to 2015, and FSN was fortunate enough to convene a Native communities cohort. And this was over a dozen Native communities from across the country that we brought together through a couple of different in-person gatherings, on the phone and through webinars. And the most recent update from that cohort is that thanks to an innovation fund project that we had last year. Tomorrow, through our newsletter, we'll be releasing 2 fact sheets that were an outcropping of that Native communities cohort, where we will be, thanks to our partners through that Innovation Fund, releasing 2 fact sheets that really elevate the importance of working with Native communities to implement farm to school. What we know is that farm to school is not a new practice for Native communities. Native communities have always had respect for and honoring agriculture, food. It's part of their culture and heritage. And so it's really important as we release these fact sheets tomorrow to just recognize that farm to school is not that new concept for Native communities. So along with our Native communities work, to mention our policy advocacy work, we do have a team in Washington, D.C. who advocates on Capitol Hill, but also supports our network to implement farm to school across the country. And the first example I'll give is also an example of our work to elevate farm to school in Native communities through the Child Nutrition Reauthorization, which is a federal bill that comes up about every 5 years for Congress to update and approve. We have advocated for inclusion of language in that bill requiring USDA to define barriers to locally and culturally appropriate school food procurement and propose regulatory solutions. So recognizing that there are many traditional foods that Native communities have for a long time celebrated and wanted to be part of their culture and heritage, and that we need to ensure those barriers to incorporating those in programs like school lunches and school breakfast are part of that conversation. And then the last piece I'll mention on this related to Native communities and policy advocacy is that in partnership with USDA's Office of Community Food Systems and their farm to school team, we work to make updates to the food buying guide, which is a guide that helps with child nutrition program purchases to actually support the procurement of more traditional foods in school meal programs and in child nutrition programs, and then also to promote USDA resources and webinars on farm to school and Native communities. And if you're interested, you can certainly check out the great resources, not only that we have coming out tomorrow, but also that USDA has created. One final example I'll give is the National Voices Project. And this was a project that last fall NFSN was selected to partner with to study how race and economic status impact farm to school participation for students, for schools, and for communities across the U.S. Later this month, we will be releasing a report highlighting the needs, the barriers, the benefits, and areas of opportunity for actually focusing on low-income communities and communities of color as we work to increase farm to school. So again, stay tuned for release of that information. And then finally, of course, as you can see with these examples, and then with the topic of today's webinar with ECE, we do a lot to elevate cultural relevancy and lift up equity in all of our work. So with that, now that I've shared our core values as well as some specific examples, we'll pass it back to Lacey to go through and introduce today's speakers. And thank you all again for being on today.
Great. Thank you, Helen. And thank you for being here and sharing this work with us. I will mention when it comes specifically to our farm to early care and education work, one way we approach integrating equity and cultural relevance is we do convene a cultural relevancy working group on a regular basis. And this group comes together to help identify culturally relevant resources, identify where gaps are in these resources, and where we can help intervene to both disseminate and partner with communities to create resources. And a big part of that is identifying success stories and lifting up and sharing stories from diverse communities through webinars like this one, through blogs, through social media, case studies, conference presentations. So I ask all of you, as part of our network, we really rely on you to help identify these stories of success and identify communities that are being really successful in this work. So we do have some presentation opportunities and case study opportunities coming up. So I do request that if any of you have stories that you'd like to share, please reach out to me and share those, because we have 3 fantastic presentations today, but I know there's a lot more out there to lift up and share. So that's my request and call to action to you for today. But moving forward, we have got 3 fantastic presentations. So I'd like to introduce our speakers and then we'll jump into their presentations. There we go. So today we have Afia Bediako. Afia Bediako is a community health advocate who spent more than 10 years active in organizational and community health initiatives. She leads the Farm to Early Care initiative at the Bedford-Stuyvesant Restoration Corporation in Brooklyn, New York, and she's passionate about healthy food access, specifically for our youngest residents. Following Afia, we'll welcome Rebecca Lemos. Rebecca Lemos is the Executive Director of City Blossoms, based in Washington, D.C. Over 15 years ago, Rebecca was asked if she would like to do a small gardening project with a group of kids in a local community center. From that point on, she grew to see urban gardening as a way to combine her interest in art, community participation, and everything green. In 2009, Rebecca officially co-founded City Blossoms, a nonprofit dedicated to fostering healthy communities by developing creative, kid-driven green spaces and initiative resources. Through their work, the City Blossoms team has supported over 70 youth garden programs nationwide. And then in our final presentation, we'll hear from Paku Hang and Angela Prokop. Paku Hang is the executive director and co-founder of the Hmong American Farmers Association, a membership-based social justice nonprofit that was created to serve, support, and advocate for Hmong farmers and their families. Paku's childhood was spent picking cucumbers for Gedney pickles and growing and selling vegetables at the local farmers market. She has over 27 years experience with farming and vegetable production and is a former member of the St. Paul Farmers Market Board of Directors. Angela Prokop is a nutrition coordinator for Community Action Partnership of Ramsey and Washington Counties Head Start. She's been working in nutrition services for Head Start for over 18 years and has been managing the nutrition services since 2009. Community Action Partnership Head Start was the first Head Start program in Minnesota to implement farm-to-child care curricula into the program in 2014 and just launched their 2016 season. So we have a wonderful panel, really looking forward to these presentations. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Afia.
Thank you, Lacey. I'm hoping that I'm coming through well. This is Afia Bediako from Bedford-Stuyvesant Restoration Corporation in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, or Bed-Stuy as it's affectionately called. And I'll be discussing our Farm to Early Care initiative in Central Brooklyn, and specifically how we apply cultural relevance, prioritize empowerment, and racial equity in the initiative. I'm really excited to be presenting, and I'm excited to be a part of this really important work where we are valuing community need and also community members' participation in the work. And I wanted to also add that personally, the work is relevant for me as my family of origin is from Bed-Stuy, and also I'm a mother of a little one. And I'm trying to advance the slides. There we go. So I'll discuss what we are doing as an initiative, who we are as an organization, some of our program strategy, and then of course some next steps of things that we're working on. And I'm hoping that you can gain insights to the value of the work that we're doing, considering cultural empowerment in efforts to make farm fresh food and food education available to little ones in classrooms and also in homes in Central Brooklyn. Okay. So Bed-Stuy Restoration is the nation's first community development corporation. And as an organization, we mitigate disparities and promote economic self-sufficiency. We deal with economic, environmental, and general concerns that affect community health and well-being, including things like asset management, affordable housing, workforce development, arts and culture, and of course, community health promotion. Our work is really to uplift people and transform disenfranchised neighborhoods into healthy, viable ones for people to work, play, and visit. And our Farm to Early Care initiative is a place-based initiative at early care and Head Start centers, improving access for little ones and their families to fresh food and fresh food education. Restoration convenes a coalition of organizations And we facilitate relationships and leverage the coalition members and other resources towards the benefit of our early care centers and then to broader community benefit, specifically in the areas of nutritious food and opportunities for physical activity. Everything that we do is really based in exchanges with partnerships. So it might be the food hub partner who we're working with to source institutional meals, farmers market partners, or even volunteers at the schools. And it's important that trust is part of these relationships, specifically in communities that have been historically marginalized. So connecting to the cultural empowerment and cultural sensitivity, I want to note that the communities that we work with are largely African and Caribbean American, or residents are African and Caribbean American. And our connection to land and agriculture is really multifaceted. We have a really rich legacy of agricultural contributions in this country through our ancestors' physical labor, ingenuity, and expertise that was offered, in addition to how we have brought interconnections of spirit, land, and food from African history to the Americas. And this is also complicated because many African Americans wish to disassociate with some of the history, and that means disassociating with food growing, agricultural efforts, and the like. So we realize that children can be a facilitator to help families reclaim and reunite with some of the rich agricultural history that exists. And we're hoping to provide a space for that that is really relevant and inclusive. So institutionally at Restoration, we have core values to amplify voices of color and promote racial equity at every level of the food system. And everything that we do is really rooted in equity, from Restoration's leadership as a people of color run community development corporation, including the communities that we work with, which in some areas also include large Latino and Chinese American populations. And in general, we're really working to ensure access or equitable access to nutritious food for the little ones, in addition to having all participants have an equal voice in program planning and implementation. So some history of the program. We began our work in fall 2013 at a pilot site at the Bedford-Stuyvesant Early Child Development Centers. It was a network of Head Start centers here in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and we had a relationship with the centers, so it was an easy ask to have them consider shifting their menu to include more healthy items, such as fresh produce and whole grains. And luckily, the administrator there was super amenable to this, and they agreed to redirect existing funding towards fresh food for the scholars. And we began the work with a delivery of kale and sweet potatoes. And from there, it really grew. And within the first year of programming, it included having volunteers from a local organization help to build classroom planters and tower growers. We worked to get 2 on-site gardens with box plots and even compost bins. We worked for some school beautification through murals. We got them access to a few fruit-bearing trees. So it really grew from there. And one of the crucial elements that we also began our first year of programming were our Fresh Food Day events, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But the work is really an interconnected sort of mix of pieces, including school food, garden support, opportunities for farmers market and farm visits, classroom education, staff development, and working towards improving parent and family access to good food for the home. So pictured here is one of the murals that we help support getting at the institution. And I'll also say that our work with the institution was partly because of a consideration of little ones being a really important population to work with because of the crucial developmental stage, as well as the fact that much of the food that little ones consume might happen at care facilities. And then more generally, we're looking at the early care environment to be an entry point to building demand for good food, and then secondarily, having early care facilities be model spaces for health within our communities. So to discuss a little bit more deeply about the Fresh Food Day events, there are a few of them pictured here. And our Fresh Food Day events have been a critical element of our farm to early care work. So after attending a few parent meetings and staff meetings, we realized that this was an important aspect that we should include within our farm to early care work. And what we did at our first group of Fresh Food Day events were connect a group of partners, including our Food Hub partner, to provide some fresh carrots and then also apples. We work with our local cooperative extension for some nutrition education work and some other partners. And within the first events, there were about 4 of them, and we had about 300 attendees between the 4 sites. And at the events, we sort of began our conversations about food, where food comes from, people's experience with food growing, cooking fresh food. And we had a deeper dive into this, and we found that because of a really asset-based approach, allowing everyone who participates to also be contributors to the conversation, that everyone has experiences with fresh food growing, scratch cooking, and they like to talk about them, they like to share them. And we also found, even amongst varied cultures, that people might have similar experiences. So beans are a staple amongst, many cultural populations. We found that yams that might be part of Southern American tradition might be a different color, but they're also a part of Latin American tradition. Or certain seasoning sauces that might be used among all of the various participants might be called different names, but they have the same bases. So people got really excited to talk about their experiences back home or at grandma's down south with growing food, with preparing fresh food. And fortunately, even in Brooklyn, in our urban environment, people are also reconnecting with growing here. So people have, box plots in their backyard, or even in public housing, there's access to the land to grow fresh food. So there's a big resurgence of that, and our Fresh Food Day events served as an opportunity to lift it up and to discuss it and get people excited about this. I'll talk a little bit about the various ways that we're engaging with our partner institutions with this farm to school, farm to preschool initiative. And school food is one of the ways, in addition to food at home, food education, and also broader community engagement. So related to the school food, we are actually working with a local food hub, Corbin Hill Food Project, who is committed to sustainable food, social justice, and community self-determination. And they work with local New York farmers as well as Southern Black farmers to aggregate produce and bring it to communities in need in New York City. We're also working with food preparers at schools, because what we found is that they may not have typically been working with fresh food, and there's a bit of a learning curve to help support them in doing the preparation that they need to do, working with fresh food particularly. And then lastly, related to school food, we're examining the result of our efforts in doing plate waste assessments to see what is actually consumed by the little ones and what's thrown away. And unfortunately, we found that vegetables were the largest food that were wasted, and in some early post-assessments, we're looking to see that reduced, and we have seen some results that show that it's reduced. Related to school food, I just wanted to give one anecdote too, that one of our food managers at one of the Head Start sites shifted their menu to include more fresh food, and one of the elements that he included was bok choy. This was something that was unfamiliar to many of the little ones that were consuming the food at the Head Start. But because of them being more familiar with it, a parent offered that the little one saw it in the supermarket, mentioned it to the parent, and it encouraged the family to then try the food. So shifting the way that the little ones eat really does have an effect on the whole family. In addition to what gets prepared at school, we're trying to shift what families have access to for their home. So really ensuring that the cycle continues outside of the school. So two of the pictures here, the one to my right, so most of your right probably, is of a pop-up farmer's market, a winter market. One of our farmer's market partners wanted to extend his growing season and his selling season and decided to work with us to host a pop-up market at one of the Head Start centers. It ended up being Corbin Hill Food Project who offered the food because of frost, and it changed the farmers' available options, but we still were able to host the market, and it was a success. Corbin Hill Food Project also supports farm shares, or a modified CSA program, at Head Start centers. So the other picture is of the farm share, and it's a really great opportunity for families to pick up at the institution when they're picking up their little one who's in school. They also can purchase and take home a share of fresh produce. So this is something that many of the families at the institutions were really on board with. And because of the communities that we're working with who sometimes are of limited financial means, the idea of collective purchasing and going in together for things is not unfamiliar. So a farm share was a really good fit in this kind of environment. We also have utilized parents as farm share coordinators. So using their expertise and their personal experience and their connections with the other parents at the school to really help support the farm share program. I'll also note here that in our lessons learned in the experience, we've also found that farm shares are not always the best pick for some sites. At some schools, because of a familiarity with donated produce and not being able to self-select what they're getting, they didn't want to participate in a farm share. So it's just an insight on all to kind of know what works well for different kinds of groups. The farm share also, folks can pay with public benefits, so that's really helpful. And the Corbin Hill Farm Share offers recipes to help people with unfamiliar items, and the recipes are available in Spanish in addition to English. I'd also add that with our Farm Share program and our farmers market work that we're doing, we're now embarking on a connection with hyper-locally grown produce, connecting urban farmers who are able to offer farm shares at our Head Start centers. Education and classroom supports are another aspect of the program that we do. And some items that are pictured here. "This smells like Thanksgiving" was a quote from a little one who was at this cooking demonstration where I think the community chef was working on something with squash, and that's what the little one had as their feedback. "Smells like Thanksgiving," so they were excited about participating there. Also shown is a picture of a sprouting activity at one of the Head Start centers, and staff here, Sonia Alonge, created a lesson for them in addition to a song, Little Urban Farmers, sung to the tune of the traditional spiritual, "He's Got the Whole World in His Hands." So really trying to connect people with things that are relevant to them and connecting the fresh food work here so that folks feel connected to the work and are excited to participate. I was going to also add that on the horizon, one of our partners at Little Sun People, a school that's located here in Brooklyn, who has an African-centric curriculum, what they're going to be doing is adding some food education, but specifically connecting the regions of Africa that they're studying and the kinds of grown in those locales so that the students can learn about the food in addition to some of the other cultural aspects. In our school garden work, there are some notable pieces. We have pictured here some youth who are part of a youth food justice group and also volunteers who were able to build one of the garden spaces at the Head Start Center. I also alluded to the fact that we do some staff development work, and what we found is that staff who are preparing food at some of the centers may not be people who are historically trained in food preparation, cooking. They might be substitute teachers or parents or, those kind of community people who have a bit of a learning curve in what might be relevant when working with fresh food. So pictured here is a school food preparer training that we offered, where staff were offered skills in like knife skills and food preserving techniques like blanching and flash freezing. Also, I think one of them they're showing they're making a fresh fruit salad, and they can preserve that in a way that's preferential to canned fruit salad and a lot tastier, working with locally grown fruit. At this event, I also learned that things like vegetable breads or soups and stews are really popular foods at the Head Start Center, and these are foods that the kitchen staff bring from their own cultural heritage. So we're finding that working with fresh food is can really stay connected to what matters for the students who are going to be consuming the food, for the preparers who are creating the food, and then also I wanted to know here the trainers at this event are also Bed-Stuy-based residents who participated in a training where they became community chefs, empowered to offer this kind of education for others in the community. And the training offered them job skills. And from this specific group of trainings that we did, where we did some staff development sessions and also education at our Fresh Food Day events, the community-trained community chefs got $12,000 in income for their work training other community residents. In our staff development, we've also done several partner convenings where we connect folks who are doing this work at the early care centers and allow them to learn from each other in their best practices and challenges. I wanted to include this photo here of these little ones at our farmers market at Restoration, and a few points that I wanted to make on it. With parent surveys that we've done, we found that apples were among one of the most popular fruits that parents said that their children consumed. So it is something that's readily available in New York State and looks like it's probably being enjoyed by at least these little ones. And this is at our farmers market, which is here at Restoration. And at the farmers market, we really work to make sure that the vendors and the farmers who are there are reflective of the community that they're serving. So pictured behind the little girls is David of Trinity Farms, who is part of New York's largest black farm. And we're also expanding the inclusivity at this farmers market. This year, we have food demonstrations that are available in English and Spanish, and also handouts that are available for Bengali participants. Parent engagement remains an important element of what we do, and family champions are a really supportive part of our initiative. From them, we've learned that parents really do value fresh food education and the availability of local fresh food to the students at meals. And we've actually found that we don't have to completely teach this idea. People already want it. We're building demand, but the parents, in addition to broader community surveys that we've done, tell us that residents really do value natural, unprocessed food, and that they want opportunities to purchase it for at home, and they want it available in their community. Some results that are shown here are nearly 1,500 students served in the last year and a half, almost 400 family and staff who participated in staff development and Fresh Food Day sessions, 25 partner sites, 76 Fresh Food Day demonstrations, and also more than 5,000 pounds of produce purchased for school meals, and more than 40 participating organizations through our partnerships. So we're really making some way, and the aim is to ensure that little ones have good access to good, clean food and opportunities to learn about where it comes from. And what's next for us? Pictured here is one of the ads that are connected to a Fresh Moves campaign that we're doing and that we have done this year, highlighting a little bit more our local farmers markets and hyperlocal growers. We also are interested in scaling up our efforts. We're working with about 25 childcare centers at this point, but interested in growing. And also newly are working with family care centers or family home centers, not just larger childcare centers. and looking efforts in other high-need institutions like hospitals and senior centers. On the horizon is also an educator convening that we're hoping to offer in the next few months, where we convene educators to help them with supports on farm to early care work that they can do in the classroom. Sustaining and building partnerships is also of importance, and we're looking to find more resources, more community partnerships, and even national partnerships. And then lastly, wraparound services and benefits that Restoration offers as a community development corporation, integrating these within our farm to school programming so that we might have place-based financial coaching or workforce development sessions and that kind of thing. So we're really excited about what we've done. We know that there's a long way to go in achieving food equity in Central Brooklyn, but we've made some significant progress in supporting a culture that embraces and demands nutritious food. And I'll close there and look forward to staying connected with folks. You can through my email or through our webpage that's listed.
Thank you, Afia. That is fantastic to see this multi-component approach and those community partnerships really enhanced and elevated in your work. So thank you so much for sharing that. In the interest of time, we're going to move right into our next presenter. But as you do have questions for Afia, please feel free to enter those in the question box, and we'll address those at the end, as many as we have time for. So with that, I'd like to move on to our next presenter, Rebecca Lemos of City Blossoms. So Rebecca, I'm going to turn over the mouse to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Lemos, and I am part of City Blossoms. I am so glad to have gone after the last presentation, because I think that it was very much well laid out why we do this kind of work and what are the benefits of it. So I can talk a little bit briefly about City Blossoms, but then I'm really going to go into kind of the techniques we use when we're working directly with young people in the gardens. So first off, City Blossoms fosters healthy communities through kid-driven, community-engaging, creative green spaces. What that really means is that we make gardens with kids and help them become the stewards of their communities through the transformation of their gardens. And so that really the gardens reflect the communities, schools, neighborhoods that they're in. We do this using kind of a four-piece model, where we bring in always in each of our projects healthy living, which is thinking about how to be healthy, both in what we eat, but what we do and how we act outside and stuff like that. Environmental awareness, obviously talking about environment with a capital E, and how what we do affects our environment, but also how what we do affects our neighborhood and the relationships that we have in our neighborhoods. And then artistic expression as a form of communication and a way to continue to decorate the spaces, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. And then finally, kind of community development, so how all these pieces together really talk about how to build a stronger and healthier community, particularly from the kids' points of view. So that said, as I speak, I love questions. So please feel free to shoot out questions. I think I do better with them than just talking sometimes. So happy to get them. Anyway, in City Blossoms history, we worked with kids from ages 2 to teen. And we work obviously in DC, which is a very dense city. And so we try to figure out how to make little garden plots wherever we can so that kids have access in their neighborhoods. The idea that every kid should be able to either walk out of school to a garden or walk out of their house, and walk 3 blocks and have access to some kind of garden or safe green space. As we began our organization, we realized that a niche for us was early childcare or early childhood, ages kind of 3 to 5. We realized that other people weren't talking about that yet, and particularly in the neighborhood where we grew up and where we started our work, it was a very Latino-heavy neighborhood, so we also started talking about offering our work in both Spanish and English. We also realized that if we started working with the little ones first, then many of these ideas that seem to be strange to older kids or to adults sometimes um, would then come much more naturally to the kids as they grew up. So anyway, so that's kind of the gist. Um, so the way that we bring inclusivity into the garden, and I just want to say I really liked how it was mentioned before as far as cultural inclusivity, but also just different interests, different customs within the neighborhood, and all that kind of stuff. So the way we bring it in when we're talking about littles is through literacy as a way to introduce ideas, recipes and gardens. And I say recipes, but it's really any kind of food activities as opportunities to explore and collaborate. And then artwork as forms of self and group expression. So I'll have some examples of how we do it, but also kind of how you can do it if this is something that interests you. So I think most of us who work with young ones know the importance of literacy and incorporating it into most of the work that is done with kids. I know that there's always reading time, there's reading out loud time, there's book time, independent book reading. What we like to do is start most of our activities with a book that is going to introduce the concept that we're going to be exploring that day. And when we first started many years ago, there weren't as many options, but now there is a fantastic array of options that explore all different kinds of topics, from um, different foods that people like to eat and different ways people like to produce food, to what it looks like to do urban gardening, how urban gardening can help strengthen communities. But then there's also a lot of books that are about translating, like the book that you see right there, My Garden, Mi Jardín, having Spanish English books, or just books that are English in another language. So yeah, we want to use books as much as we can. I really like that cover of Tokyo Dig's Gardens. I think that's adorable. But so why do we use books? Sometimes it doesn't seem like an obvious first step into getting into the garden. So we like sharing books, and we encourage people to use books, not only to present a diverse group of characters, but also present ideas, techniques, and memories from different perspectives. So like Tokyo Digs a Garden, there's a lot of books now that are written in the perspective of kids from different cultural and socioeconomic backgrounds. And using those books are a great way to begin to talk about, why it is that we garden, or why it is that we grow food and produce food and share food, and how and why it's important to respect the different ways that people use food within their cultures. And like I said, also it's an opportunity to explore uh, other languages, and by that, other cultures. Not only do we use books that are translated, but also we go through exercises with the kids of creating books that are bilingual, so that then they can take that home and share that. And that's a great activity that is like a build upon activity, where you read a book that's bilingual, do an activity, and then create your own books that it can go home that are in different languages. And then finally, it's familiarizing young gardeners with the activities that we're going to do. So this particularly, we like to think about a lot of young ones at first get a little nervous about trying foods that they're not used to. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But reading about it and thinking about, another kid doing the same thing, or another kid appreciating a certain kind of food, begins to relax the kids into being okay with tasting something new. It's kind of that first step and introduction. One of our favorite books around that term, I think, is like Lola Hates Tomatoes, or I Will Never Ever Eat a Tomato. And it's that kind of process of being able and being okay with tasting different foods. If literacy and bringing books into your work sounds like something that's interesting. I put a resource at the bottom. DC Healthy Schools Act created a book list that is really fantastic, and it is broken into different ages, but also takes under consideration the, bringing in different cultures and not just, reflecting mainstream. So that can be found through the Office for the State Superintendent of Education's website, or I think you can also just Google DC Healthy Schools Act book list, and you should be able to find it. Also, fantastic news is that it's all available on Amazon these days. So really, a lot of these books are really accessible. Um, and when we use library books, we've also been able to find them at libraries. So that's the literacy part. So gardens and recipes, using these as opportunities for exploration and collaboration. The way that we tend to work is that we really like to create spaces and situations where kids and groups can empower themselves. And so I really put this picture of this garden. This is the Girard Children's Community Garden here in Columbia Heights. And I put this in to show kind of what we think about when we're creating spaces and how the kids can kind of reflect back the work that they do in the spaces. So if you see here, of course, we have the raised beds, but we also on the fence have these art weaving installation pieces that we did with the kids that took, several weeks to do, but was kind of playing with the ideas of weaving, which can bring in conversations about different cultures, but also softens up the space and can be something that a kid points to and says, I did this. As much as it is, I did the garden and I grew the food and I'm sharing the food. And then within the garden also, you'll see there's signs for, the different herbs, and these signs are actually in Spanish. So being open to maybe making the signs in different languages. Also just creating the space so that there's areas for exploration and that different kids that may come from different backgrounds and speak different languages can kind of come together. And what we've seen is when they produce food together, when they grow plants in the gardens, when they work together, the relationships and bonds are made cross cultures and cross socioeconomic levels. And so we think that just making the space sometimes is powerful enough. So that's how we like to use the gardens themselves. And then, oops, excuse me. So the same thing with using recipes. We like to use recipes to learn about each other's cultures and learn about new ones. And in that vein, the idea of being creative when you're doing recipes. Sometimes it can be finding a recipe or asking parents to give ideas that are things that they cook at home, but sometimes it can also be mashing together different recipes. So on the top left, you'll see a group of kids making Swiss chard quesadillas. And so the quesadilla part is something that many of the kids in this group were used to. Swiss chard, however, was a type of food that they were not used to at all. And so it was, how can we introduce different foods that we know are healthy, we know are affordable, we know are available, but maybe aren't part of a home environment's current kind of menu. And how can we get them to consider it? So the Swiss chard quesadillas are always a hit. They're always enjoyed quite a bit. As you can see, there's a young kid in the back just munching on the Swiss chard already. So just this idea of how can we put together different recipes that introduce Swiss chard and kale and radishes and whatnot. Sorry, the radish just caught my eye. So being creative with recipes and asking, like I said, different family members and kids to bring in recipes. And then what we also like to think about is, if not just the recipe or the food we're making, but thinking about the techniques that we're even incorporating. A lot of times, the more we garden and the more we make recipes, the more we come across different people sharing techniques that they've brought either from their homes, their home countries, or, have just collected in different ways. And so we try to incorporate these into the gardens or use them and into the making of the food, or use them as ways to embrace family and community members as experts, very similar to what was being talked about before as far as having the Bed-Stuy residents teaching each other different recipes. Same idea here. And we find it incredibly powerful where parents of some of the kids may feel insecure sometimes as to what can they bring to their kids' education. And when we create these spaces and we ask them, to share their techniques, it's really quite magical to see people's responses and their excitement. So a few examples of that is, and I bet this will be touched upon later, there are definitely a lot of Chinese families that come with techniques that we don't tend to use very often. And we've had a few different families create really wonderful structures for us and grow new vegetables and foods for us to try. And that has been incredibly successful. And then sometimes it's even thinking about what tools we use. We like to use mortar and pestles all the time with our early childhood classes, not just because it's kid friendly, but also because it is a tool that is used in various different cultures and in different cuisines. And so we think that it's kind of a nice way to come back um, to making some of those connections. So really, again, using the gardens and the recipes as ways for people to show their expertise. Um, and then again, designing the gardens for play and exploration, as well as food production, encourages kids to independently strengthen their relationships and collaborations. And this idea of inclusivity and diversity, we really always think goes back to building strong relationships with each other. And so we always want to think about our work as how can we create the space for those relationships. And I know I've been repeating that over and over again, but that's really like a core value for us. And then finally, artwork. A lot of times the little ones that we work with, information is always being given to them and we're asking them to process it and to learn. But it's not always often that we ask them to give the information back and represent themselves. And so really when we're thinking about artwork in the gardens or artwork when we present recipes and food at events and stuff like that, we really think about what can kids do to as forms of artistic expression. So on the left, you'll see the back of our first little cookbook that we made, and we asked each of the kids to do a self-portrait. And so just that when this cookbook goes out into the world, people would see that these are all the different kids and all the different faces, and the way they decide to present themselves is shared. And we really liked the way that came out. And then you'll see on the middle top, we did a kind of photo exhibit idea where we took pictures, and these were older students, but this can always be done with anyone. And we did these posters of the kids' pictures and put them in the garden. So literally when you're walking in the garden, when you're picking the food, when you're eating it, you're seeing the images of the kids that grew it. And they're seeing images of themselves as they're working in the spaces. And I think that really helps have a sense of ownership and pride. And then the other ones are just different kinds of signs that can be made. And I know that we're talking about little littles, and there's all kinds of other techniques to use to make similar types of signs, but using the skill sets of 3 to 5-year-olds. But one that we found really successful was a project that we did when we asked kids to ask their families how they use food at home and what kinds of cuisines they cook at home and what kind of vegetables and fruits they like to use. And in our neighborhood, we had in this classroom and in the neighborhood, there was a large representation of Ethiopian families, Vietnamese, Salvadorian, and Dominican. So we ended up with this fence along the garden that anyone who walked by could see. And in the fence was kind of these different expressions of how people use the food. And so as you saw the food growing in the garden, you could also connect them to these signs. And the signs have now been up for a few years, and it's amazing how much conversation they start. And it's clearly shows that it's kids that have done it. So then it's not just that there's conversation, but that people express thanks to the kids for creating this artwork and for creating the garden and for bringing food into the neighborhood and sharing the food. So really, again, adding to that sense of ownership. So yeah, those were the ideas, but I mean, those were some of the projects we've done. And see down here is African American cuisine as part of that project. Um, and this is just kind of reiterating what I said about using artwork to transform green spaces, to really reflect the gardeners, food producers, and then the larger community. We find it incredibly powerful to add that to any garden that we work in or any space. Um, and then again, this strengthens the sense of ownership and stewardship and embracing and sharing culture, and also being able to kind of expand the definition of culture or customs so that it really, whatever group that you end up working with, it's pulling out what are the unique aspects of the different kids that make up that group and how to express those to the group as a whole and to a broader audience. So that said, these are two publications that we've put together in the last few years. One is Our First Harvest, Nuestra Primera Cosecha, and it is a collection of 30 lessons for early childhood education. And it's garden-based education, but a lot of it is obviously around food and how to make different recipes, but also just how to use the gardens as another learning space. And we've created it so that it can work in really small gardens. It can work if you're just talking about like 1 or 2 little plots, or of course it can work in larger spaces. And then the other one is Garden Gastronomy, Gastronomía del Jardín, and that's 27 recipes that are non-cook recipes that we've collected during our work in our different spaces. And they can be done in gardens using produce that is relatively easy to grow, and can be done with kids of all ages. So yeah, that's the gist. Thank you guys for listening in. I forgot to make that last slide that tells you how to contact us. So if you have any questions, we're always happy to share with people. My email address is Rebecca, REBECCA, @cityblossoms.org, or you can always visit our website, www.cityblossoms.org. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. That's fantastic. And I'll also send out our speaker's contact information in the follow-up email. So if you have further questions, you can contact Rebecca. In the interest of time, we will move on to our final panelist, and we will answer as many questions as we can at the end of all of our panelists. So please do continue to enter those questions as they come to you in the question box. So last but not least, we will turn it over to Angie and Paku to hear about their partnerships in building Farm to Head Start in Minnesota. So I will turn the mouse over to you.
Hello, my name is Angela Prokop. I go by Angie. I am the nutrition coordinator for Head Start.
Hi, everybody. This is Paku King. I'm with the Hmong American Farmers Association. And for the next couple of minutes, Angie and I were thinking that we could share with you some of the things that our two organizations have done to really incorporate cultural relevant curriculum resources and programming into our educational work. We wanted to first talk to you guys a little bit about who we are and how we got started, and then we'll talk about what we've done together and how we've actually incorporated some of these cultural relevancy work.
So Community Action Partnership of Ramsey and Washington County, Head Start. We are the preschool program for Ramsey County, targeting 3 to 5-year-old children. We are income-based, dealing with special needs and children with disabilities. Minnesota is a very diverse state. We are known for a large immigration and refugee population, and in turn, our Head Start program is a very diverse population with over 25 different cultures and over 34 different languages. And this is something that we serve on a regular basis. In the late 80s to 90s, Minnesota had a large immigration and refugee Hmong population, and we've seen changes in those immigration patterns over the years. After the Hmong population started immigrating to Minnesota, we've seen more Somali, Ethiopian, Middle Eastern, and East African population. And most recently, we've had a large and Burmese population immigration. And even though Karen and Burmese are not considered Hmong, they have very similar traditions as our Hmong families that we work with. So we started the farm program in Head Start in summer of 2014. We are now piloting, or we're now progressing in our third year program, and our goal is to keep our program growing and to be sustainable throughout the months here in Minnesota where we have very seasonal vegetables. So our goal is to make sure that we can continue this program throughout the year. We have worked with Institute of Agriculture for Agriculture and Trade Policy. They work locally and globally at the intersection of policy and practice to ensure fair and sustainable food, farm, and trade systems. Aaron with IATP approached Gail Kelly in the Minnesota Head Start Association and put IATP in contact with our Head Start program at CAPRW.
So in addition to Head Start and IATP, there's also the Hmong American Farmers Association. It's the three of us that are working together on this project. And I thought before I talked a little bit about HAFA, or the Hmong American Farmers Association, I'm wondering if folks are not necessarily familiar with Hmong people. So I thought I'd give you a little bit of an education. Hmong people are an ethnic group that are original to southern China many thousands of years ago. And through war and strife, people began to migrate outside of China into parts of Southeast Asia. And so Hmong people nowadays live in, Vietnam, in Cambodia, in Thailand, and some still in China. And there's a large population that lives in Laos. During the Vietnam War, the Hmong people who lived in Laos, they allied with the United States CIA to basically patrol parts of the Ho Chi Minh Trail that went into Laos. After the Vietnam War, in Laos, there was a coup, and the communist faction came into power, and they began to target all the Hmong families because they felt that those Hmong families really betrayed them. And so we saw after the Vietnam War a huge exodus of Hmong people trying to flee Laos because they were being put into re-education camps. And many of them were resettled all around the world. So nowadays we have Hmong people in Denmark, Hmong people in Australia, Hmong people in Canada and French Guyana, and there's a very large population of Hmong people in the United States, but particularly in Minnesota. Minnesota has the second largest Hmong population in the country. And especially in the metropolitan area, more than 50% of all the urban farmers in St. Paul and Minneapolis are Hmong. So the Hmong American Farmers Association was created back in 2011, and it's a membership-based nonprofit that works to uplift Hmong farmers. We work with over 128 Hmong farmers and families, and we aggregate their produce in a food hub, and then we sell it to other institutions, including Head Start. Annually, our food probably feeds over 250,000 people in the metropolitan area.
So when we got started in the Farm to Child Care program, like I mentioned before, IATP approached Head Start to bring the idea of running the Farm to Child Care into our program. They were wanting to focus on cultural relevance, which is why we were also introduced to Paku and Hapa. One of the things in our first meetings was that there was noticeably difference that some Hmong children were losing and not recognizing some of those cultural foods and recipes that they would see at home because they were getting the majority of their foods in childcare and in schools. So we wanted to make sure that we took that into account when we were talking about our recipes, the foods that we were using, the curriculum that we were using. So the Hmong culture has deep roots in farming. Many farmers of Hapa are family members of the families that we serve. So it was really communal. We had this holistic approach of how we were working with our communities. Paku with Hapa and Head Start shared very similar values and the approach. It was important for us to have relationships with the Hmong farmers and that our HAPA farmers are highlighted in the curriculum with a bio and pictures, and so the children were able to see who the farmers that were providing the food, in addition to some of the field trips that we'll talk a little bit about in a little bit. Additionally, HAPA worked with Russ Davis Wholesale, and Russ Davis was our food processor. They are a local employee-owned company. It was important for us to make sure that we were using all local-owned companies to make sure that this program was going to be successful. CKC was our catering company, and they are a minority woman and locally owned company also, and their mission was to make sure that we were giving kids good food to eat. On our second year of our pilot, we wanted to make sure that we were increasing the presence of locally grown produce in our centers, and we also wanted to make sure that we were increasing the family engagement. And you'll see in a couple of slides the actual increase of that.
So like Angie said, you know, this pilot project really came together because we wanted to focus on the local and the small farmers, but we really also were aligned around this value of how do we create a food system that works for everybody. And I think in traditional food system, the food is grown on these mega farms, and it's a monoculture, so it's like 1,000 acres is the same type of product, and then it's shipped to a warehouse, maybe it's cleaned, and then it goes to a processor, and then it gets to the kids, and there's really no relationship among any of the main producers. There's no intentionality. It's just a commodity. But our relationship is very different. You know, we begin with having Angie and her team think, you know, intentionally about what are the vegetables that are culturally relevant or that the kids may see in their own home diet. And then we also think about, okay, how do we create recipes that are also culturally relevant that can be learned or shared. We have a really strong, as Angie said, there's a really strong focus on local and seasonal, that the menu is seasonally sourced. And we really think about how do we build up our local economy. Studies have shown that $1 invested in farm-to-school programs actually can yield $2 to $2.28 back into the community. So there's this really strong focus about how do we not only improve the nutritional intake of our kids, but how do we lift up the entire community? And those were shared values that both Head Start and HAFA and ISCP had going into this project.
And additionally, one of the things that with Russ Davis, as you can see with this new food system, is that Russ Davis would get the food from HAPA. Russ Davis could provide us local foods from any farmer, but really it was important for us to work with HAPA because of that community that we provided with HAPA. Their families are families that we're serving, and it just created this sense of pride with the food that we were serving also. CKC was also very, very much integral in this process too. They supported our values, and they had the same mission, and they wanted to make sure Russ Davis was involved because we needed to be cautious of food safety at the same time. So it was so important for us to have a circle of companies and agencies to help support each other's program's values.
And Angie, if you don't mind, I wanted to add, this it was hard work. And there were definitely hiccups. And from the farmer's perspective, I don't think we would have been able to prevail, especially with that processor, if we didn't have the support of Head Start. And just like what Angie said, it was Angie and it was that team that was putting the pressure, saying, no, listen, you could get carrots from anybody else, and they might be cheaper, but we want to invest in these small immigrant farmers. And that paved the way for our success. So what have we actually accomplished? What have we done together, right? We, as Angie said, this is our third year of engagement. We have actually been selling over 5,000 pounds of fresh produce every year. That's the equivalent from the farmer's perspective. That's the equivalent of a whole farmer's market, going to a whole farmer's market every day for a whole summer, for the equivalent of what we've been selling to Head Start.
In our first year of pilot, we served 23,085 servings. In last year, when we were talking about wanting to grow the program and provide more farm to Head Start programming, we served 39,496 servings. So we did accomplish our goal with growing, and we also accomplished our goal of creating more family engagement. We'll talk a little bit more about family engagement as the slide comes up.
Right. In addition to all the actual procurement, we were all able to create a bicultural training program that we piloted it both to the kids, the teachers, and the parents, and we involved them back into training them and then actually really focusing on the teachers to make sure that it felt that it was culturally relevant.
Between HAPA and Head Start, we organized over 12 farm tours with over 400 kids, and this is up to date as of last week. We still have 3 more field trips scheduled this year. And really, the farm tours are so impactful for the kids because they get to be more hands-on with the farmers. They get to see the tools. They get to use some of the traditional tools that they're using on the farm. They get to pick the vegetables, and then they get to have a little snack at the farm also. And so it really brings it back home to the kids about where their food is coming from, and it is so impactful for them.
So as Angie alluded to, the kids come out to our farm. It's a farm that's only about 30 minutes outside of our main city. It's a 155-acre farm. And this is a picture actually of one of the core modules that we teach the little kids. It's on soil health and soil fertility. And this is really important, I think, because oftentimes people say, wow, is that too sophisticated for little kids? Other modules that we talk about or we teach the kids are good bugs and bad bugs around pollinators, or we talk to them about cover crops. And people think it's too sophisticated, but the truth is that this is actually one of the most favorite modules. And after this picture was taken, the kids actually went out and they planted sunflower seeds, and they also planted oats. And that was used later on when the school came back in the fall for our harvest farm tour.
Our harvest farm tour was my absolute favorite farm tour. The children came back, they got to dress in the Hmong costumes, they got to thrash the wheat that they planted in the summertime, and I just felt that it was so intentional, and it taught the children so much about the Hmong culture, along with the staff and the other adults that attended the field trip too. It really brought to light the Hmong New Year and the harvest time, and it blew my mind, honestly.
So how did we incorporate cultural relevant curriculum, resources, and program into our educational work? And we did that, we think, in really 5 core ways.
So one of them is that we recognize that kids come from different cultures. Like I mentioned, Head Start has a very diverse culture, and this isn't just St. Paul, it's across the nation. But we want to support our children. One of Head Start's roles is, and really performance requirements even, is that we want to support our children and families to help them be successful. There are 34 languages plus in the Head Start that we serve, and we make sure that we bridge the gaps with language barriers by providing staff in the classroom to the languages that are served in that center. We want to try to employ the parents as much as we can, whether they're a classroom aide, a bus monitor, in our kitchen, as a teacher, a bus driver even. We want to help lift them up and support them to be successful. Now, yes, that's part of the Head Start culture, but we wanted to make sure that this message was conveyed into our farm program with our curriculum, our food, and our activities too. So we try to involve our parents and children as much as possible with culturally relevant materials. When we involve our culture in training as parents and teachers, first we invited some of our staff to come by and go through the curriculum that IATP provided us. And we went through it and made sure that it supported the cultural values of our families that we provide to on a regular basis. In addition, HAPA came through and helped us train on that curriculum with the staff. Now, the staff that came to help create the curriculum wasn't necessarily the same staff that was trained on the curriculum. And then additionally, we had parents come in. We have multiple parent events and trainings, and HAPA came in and spoke to families at different parent events about what HAPA is and who they are, and CSAs, the community-supported agriculture. And Head Start also provided cultural activities for these family events. And some of it was family and management events where our policy council, our board of parents, worked with our staff. And so we really brought it hands-on activities for family engagement, because that was a big push for our second year also. But there was this one activity we did I want to say 6 different parent events where we made spring rolls, and it was so positively taken in. Our families were working with our teachers. Our teachers came up and said that was one of the most fun family activities that they ever had. And then we wanted to make sure that additional activities that we did in the classroom with the children were culturally relevant also. Whether we did a curry, or we did salsa, or we did spring rolls in one of the classrooms. We just did tasting of things. We, exploring the foods and just touching it too. So we just wanted to make sure that we were being respectful to the food and respectful to our cultures. When we worked with our caterer, we wanted to make sure that we were providing culturally influenced recipes. And CKC, our caterer, was very accommodating with this. They worked really hard to make sure that we were using different spices, different herbs, anything we could to be respectful and make sure that the food that we're serving met the cultures that we serve. However, sometimes getting children to try and taste and eat the foods can be a difficult task, especially when they haven't tried the food before. One of the first vegetables that we tried was the eggplant, and we made it in 2 ways. We made a ratatouille with it, and then we made a baba ganoush. And additionally, the kids hadn't ever worked with this before, but so did some of our teachers, and our food staff hadn't worked with it before. So there was a little bit of miscommunication of how it was presented. One week it was served hot, the next week it was served cold, and so there was a lot of confusion, and it didn't really go over very well. So my point is, though, is that we had to use our experiences, and we adjusted our future recipes and meals for the foods that we knew would be taken in more, that they would be able to, the kids would be more accepting to it. But, we want to try and make sure that we're introducing the kids to new foods also at the same time.
Another way that we are introducing, cultural competency and relevancy into our work is by acknowledging that role models matter, and that who is in front of the children really can influence how they think of themselves and what they could do. And so in our partnership, it's really important that we have people of color, people who are bilingual in front of the kids, especially men of color, who are speaking with authority and competency in these technical fields. So this is a picture of our farm manager on the Hoffa farm, who's talking to the children about how things are grown and about the different needs to trellis or to have soil health, so that you can really accommodate all the different methods. But it's really important for us to have the people who look like the kids in the audience be the people who are also in authority. And then last but not least, we want to insert culture into all of our learnings. And so, as I mentioned before, we have many farm tours, and there are many modules that we teach the kids when they're at the farm. There's things like Hmong tools and traditional Hmong tools, and then how they change now that we're in a different country, and how we actually have the farmers come in and teach this module. And again, the farmers are speaking Hmong while someone is interpreting, but the kids can see that bilingual exchange happening. We also have other modules about, like I said, where things are grown, and we actually teach the kids, we show them a Hmong basket, a Hmong traditional basket that's used when in the olden days, the little girls and little boys would help their parents pick stuff, and they would put it just in that basket. And so we put the basket on girls, and they can try that. And then one of our most popular modules is a module about harvest time. And we talk about how harvest time in the Hmong calendar is actually New Year's time. So Hmong people would celebrate the New Year at the end of harvest, because that was when there was the most food and there was the most abundance. And when the little boys and girls come, like in this picture, we show them all the different Hmong costumes and the Hmong jewelry that is traditionally worn at the New Year celebration. We teach them courting courting games. So it's a little bit funny, but where the little boys and girls and the partners throw balls at each other, and that's part of the games. And we really lift up the seasonality, how the calendar, the agricultural calendar, influenced Hmong holidays. And so these are just some of the ways in which we are complementing the agricultural learning with the cultural learning. So in summary, And when we think about what are ways that this partnership has really incorporated culture, there's so many ways, but it begins with number one, celebrating culture and recognizing there is such a thing as culture, and then inviting parents and teachers and other stakeholders to be allies in this celebration. We demand cultural competency, not just relevancy, but competency from all of our partners, and we understand that it's a work in progress. And then lastly, we promote diverse role models and we incorporate cultural learning in all aspects of our activities. And that's how we feel like we're moving our community forward. Thank you, everyone.
That is fantastic. Thank you both for sharing your work and those wonderful pictures of the great experiences happening there in your program. We will take just a couple of questions. I will say that if we don't get to your question, we will pass them on to the presenters and have a follow-up for you. We do have just a couple of questions we can ask right now. One question is, for all of our panelists, are any of you aware of any farm to early care and education videos, short videos, based in Spanish language or highlighting Latino communities? That might be a resource for folks in the audience.
This is Rebecca, and I would say that I have not come across any yet, but that would be amazing.
So perhaps a gap there that we can look to hopefully filling in the future. Great, and I do want to, we do have a number of comments extending their great thanks and appreciation for all of your presentations and the great pictures and information that you've shared. We do have one question, and Carolyn, you might have to help me make sure that I'm asking this in the right way, but this is a question for Afia. Afia, can you speak to the outcomes from your program versus the output? So perhaps what are you seeing from the children and the families versus just those numbers of participants that you've reached? Do you have any kind of qualitative outcomes that you're seeing? Afia, are you still with us?
I'm so sorry. I'm muted. I was asking you a long question. Apologies. So I'm not clear on the question. Did you want qualitative results or you want numerics about number of people we served?
I think we're looking at qualitative. So what outcomes are you seeing in the children and the families and the practitioners?
Yeah, there are loads of anecdotes and stories that we have. And, you know, they're one-offs that I mentioned about the bok choy that the little one asked their parents to buy at a supermarket. Or one of them also is that a little one who shifted their afternoon snack request to be apple of some other kind of junk food that they could have available to them. So there are a number of stories that we've learned from people's, you know, experiences and responses. I'm not sure how many to offer, but there definitely are results with shifting palates and shifting interests and people who are happy because of new availability for access to produce at home and, you know, offer their experiences of things that they've tried and, you know, how good the farm fresh eggs were compared to something that they would buy someplace else. So there are a lot of stories.
Great. And are any of you collecting data on changes in health status or food purchasing patterns, or collecting any of that kind of information from your participants, families?
This is Angie over at Head Start, and we are collecting height and weight and BMI results that we use to compare from year to year. And we have seen a slight decrease in BMIs with our program as a whole. But it's hard to say if that's exactly related to the farm program, but it does show that our program is decreasing in BMIs.
Here in Brooklyn, we've aimed to collect some health data from the students, but it was pretty complicated because of just logistics and staff capacity, and then also their requirements for their health records and how that's not necessarily connected with with what we're doing and our needs and following with students if students change schools. So it was a little complicated, even though we made an attempt to do that.
Great. Thanks for that input. And definitely another great conversation to have about evaluation and data collection as well. So we're getting to the end of the hour here, and I want to extend a fantastic thank you to our presenters and their wonderful presentations and great information, and for sharing their stories, and also to all of you for your attending and your participation. As you exit out of the webinar, there will be a very, very brief survey that we would love to hear back from you. What you'd like to see and how this webinar has been useful to you. Also, please do mark your calendars for the next webinar. That will be October 12th, and you'll have the opportunity to register for that in the follow-up email. That email will come in the next couple of days and also include the recording of the webinar. As I mentioned earlier, we are looking for opportunities to do some conference presentations as well as case studies around culturally relevant practices within farm to early care and education. So I would love for you to reach out to me if you'd be interested in sharing your own story within your own community. And with that, I thank you again for your time and for you being a part of this and all of your great work in furthering farm to early care and education across the country. And have a wonderful day. Please reach out at anytime to the National Farm to School Work with questions or for more information. And we will plan to see you in October. Many thanks.